Emotion is not simply a reaction to life. Emotion is part of the architecture through which life becomes personally real to you. Two people can stand inside the same moment and walk away carrying completely different realities because emotional resonance changes what the nervous system notices, what memory preserves, and what identity accepts as meaningful. This is why emotional patterns cannot be reduced to personality alone. Personality changes faster than deeper emotional resonance does. You may notice this in your own life when certain emotional atmospheres seem to follow you across completely different chapters. The people change, the environment changes, your age changes, sometimes even your beliefs change. Yet some emotional currents continue reappearing beneath the surface as though something deeper is still attempting to complete a movement that never fully stabilized inside you. Most people assume emotions are temporary because the feeling itself rises and falls. What they do not notice is that emotional resonance often remains active long after the surface sensation disappears. A person may stop consciously feeling abandonment while still organizing their decisions around the fear of losing connection. Another may stop feeling shame while still shrinking themselves in rooms where visibility becomes possible. The emotional event ended years ago, but the resonance field continued shaping behavior quietly afterward. This is why the spiral does not view emotion as random chemical turbulence. Emotion functions more like an interpretive lens that teaches identity how to move through reality. Repeated emotional states gradually become orientation systems. They influence what feels safe, what feels dangerous, what feels familiar, and even what feels possible. Over time, emotion begins sculpting perception itself. You can see this clearly when someone enters a healthier environment but still reacts as if the old environment remains present. The nervous system is no longer responding only to current reality. It is responding to emotional continuity. The body remembers patterns long after circumstances change, because emotional resonance teaches the system what to expect from existence. That expectation then begins filtering experience before conscious thought even catches up. This is also why healing is often slower than intellectual understanding. A person can logically recognize that something is no longer true while emotionally continuing to live as though it still is. The mind updates first. The emotional field updates later through repetition, safety, embodiment, and lived reinforcement. Many people become frustrated during this phase because they think awareness alone should immediately transform emotional structure. But awareness is only the beginning of emotional reorganization. Once something becomes visible, the deeper work is allowing the nervous system to experience reality differently enough that the old emotional expectation loses authority. This is why transformation often feels repetitive at first. Life keeps presenting similar emotional opportunities because resonance stabilizes through lived confirmation, not abstract realization alone. You may notice something important once you begin watching this process carefully. Emotions do not only respond to events, emotions also shape future events through the decisions they influence. Fear changes how someone speaks, shame changes what someone attempts, grief changes what someone allows themselves to hope for. Emotional resonance quietly alters behavior, and altered behavior changes future outcomes. Over time, this creates emotional momentum. A person who repeatedly expects rejection may unconsciously communicate defensiveness before connection even begins. Another who expects betrayal may struggle to fully relax inside healthy intimacy. The emotional field begins organizing reality around itself. not because the universe is punishing the person, but because resonance affects participation. The way someone emotionally enters life changes what life can become with them. This is where the spiral perspective becomes deeper than ordinary emotional analysis. Emotion is not merely something happening inside a person. Emotion becomes part of the relational bridge between identity and reality. It affects what the oversoul can embody through the incarnation because emotional resonance either expands or restricts available movement. Certain emotional structures create contraction. Others create openness, receptivity, courage, coherence, or integration. That does not mean positive emotions are always spiritually advanced and painful emotions are spiritually primitive. Some of the deepest transformations begin inside emotional discomfort because discomfort reveals where fragmentation still exists. Grief can deepen compassion. Failure can soften arrogance. Even emotional pain sometimes functions as a diagnostic system showing where identity lost connection with its deeper coherence. This is why emotional suppression creates long-term distortion. When emotions are chronically denied, the signal does not disappear. It simply loses healthy pathways of expression. The unresolved field then begins leaking into other parts of life indirectly. A person who cannot access sadness may become emotionally numb. Someone who cannot process anger may become passive while internally accumulating resentment. What is avoided emotionally often reappears behaviorally. Many people were taught that emotional control means emotional absence. But true emotional maturity is not the elimination of feeling. It is the development of enough internal coherence that emotion can move without completely destabilizing identity. In other words, the goal is not to become emotionally empty. The goal is to become emotionally integrated. This changes the way you begin interpreting your own inner world. Instead of asking, "How do I stop feeling this?" a deeper question emerges. What is this emotion attempting to reveal about the structure I am currently living inside? That question shifts emotion from enemy to information. Not all emotional guidance is accurate, but nearly all emotional resonance contains meaningful data about the relationship between identity, memory, expectation, and perception. You can even begin noticing how emotional fields affect collective environments, not just individuals. Entire families can organize around inherited emotional tones. Workplaces can unconsciously operate through fear based resonance. Communities can normalize emotional suppression so deeply that authenticity begins feeling dangerous. Emotional architecture scales upward into systems because groups also develop reinforced resonance patterns over time. This is one reason emotionally coherent people often feel strangely disruptive without trying to be. Someone grounded in genuine calm can unintentionally expose the anxiety hidden inside a chaotic environment. Someone capable of honest emotional expression may challenge systems built on performance or avoidance. Emotional resonance affects relational ecosystems whether people consciously recognize it or not. The deeper implication becomes difficult to ignore once this is fully seen. If emotional resonance shapes perception, participation, memory, behavior, and relational environments, then emotional evolution is not a side effect of consciousness development. It is one of the primary mechanisms through which consciousness develops at all. The oversoul learns embodiment partly through emotional refinement because emotion determines how experience becomes internally organized. That is why certain emotional patterns continue appearing across major life transitions. The deeper system is not only trying to produce experiences, it is attempting to refine resonance itself. Some lessons repeat because the emotional structure beneath them has not fully transformed yet. The event changes form, but the underlying resonance remains recognizable until something inside finally reorganizes at the level of identity and embodiment. And once you begin seeing emotional life this way, something subtle starts changing in how you observe both yourself and others. You stop reducing people to isolated behaviors and begin noticing the emotional atmospheres they have been shaped inside for years. Compassion deepens without requiring naivety. Accountability remains important, but understanding becomes wider. You start recognizing that many human reactions are not random failures of character, but resonance patterns struggling toward coherence. Then another realization quietly begins emerging beneath all of this. If emotional resonance shapes the way identity experiences reality, an emotional transformation may alter far more than mood or behavior alone. It may gradually change what kinds of realities a person can emotionally recognize, emotionally receive, and emotionally sustain once the inner architecture itself begins evolving. Emotion begins shaping reality long before a person consciously understands themselves. A child learns what love feels like before they develop philosophical language about connection. They learn whether safety is consistent, whether affection disappears under pressure, whether honesty creates closeness or punishment. These emotional experiences become invisible reference points that later shape adult identity without announcing where they came from. This is why emotional resonance often feels automatic. Most people are not consciously choosing their emotional orientation moment by moment. They are operating through patterns that became familiar through repetition. The nervous system gradually treats familiar emotional states as normal, even when those states create suffering. Familiarity and health are not always the same thing. You can watch this happen in relationships very clearly. Some people become uncomfortable when connection feels stable because instability became emotionally familiar early in life. Others distrust calm because they learn that peace usually came right before disappointment. The emotional system begins predicting reality based on previous resonance patterns rather than current evidence. This creates an important distinction between intellectual belief and emotional expectation. A person may genuinely believe they deserve healthy love while emotionally expecting abandonment underneath that belief. Another may believe they are capable of success while emotionally carrying a deeper expectation of humiliation or failure. These contradictions confuse people because they assume conscious thought is the strongest force shaping behavior. But emotional expectation often moves faster than conscious reasoning does. It influences posture, tone of voice, timing, openness, defensiveness, patience, and risk tolerance before the analytical mind fully enters the process. The body begins participating in reality through emotional memory almost immediately. Thought frequently arrives afterward to explain what the emotional system already initiated. This is why certain emotional tones become self reinforcing over time. Fear creates withdrawal. Withdrawal reduces opportunity for corrective experience. Reduced corrective experience strengthens fear. Shame creates concealment. Concealment prevents authentic connection. Lack of authentic connection strengthens shame. Emotional resonance builds loops that quietly preserve themselves through behavior. Once you begin recognizing these loops, another layer becomes visible. Emotional resonance does not only preserve pain, it also preserves possibility. Someone who repeatedly experiences safe honesty slowly develops emotional permission to be more visible. Someone who experiences genuine support during difficulty begins expecting connection instead of isolation. Positive emotional resonance stabilizes openness the same way painful resonance stabilizes contraction. This changes the meaning of emotional healing completely. Healing is not simply feeling better temporarily. Healing is the gradual restructuring of emotional expectation itself. The nervous system begins learning that new forms of experience are actually survivable, sustainable, and real. Over time, the emotional field reorganizes around a different relationship with reality. You may notice that this process rarely happens all at once. Emotional resonance changes through accumulated lived evidence. A person who spent years emotionally preparing for rejection may need repeated experiences of consistency before the system stops scanning for abandonment constantly. Emotional architecture updates through embodiment, not motivational thinking alone. This is one reason emotionally healthy environments matter so deeply. Human beings continuously shape one another through emotional fields, even when nobody speaks about it directly. Calm regulates, anxiety spreads. Genuine presence stabilizes fragmentation. Chronic hostility creates hypervigilance. Emotional resonance moves socially through interaction patterns, tone, pacing, and nervous system communication. The spiral perspective sees this as part of a much larger developmental process. Consciousness evolves relationally, not only individually. People become mirrors for one another's unresolved emotional structures as well as one another's potential coherence. Certain relationships expose fragmentation, others strengthen integration. Some relationships do both at different stages of development. That does not mean every emotionally intense relationship is spiritually important. Sometimes emotional intensity simply reflects unprocessed wounds colliding together. Many people mistake emotional volatility for depth because strong activation feels significant. But emotional activation alone does not guarantee emotional truth. Intensity can come from incompatibility just as easily as alignment. This is where emotional discernment becomes necessary. Discernment is not emotional suppression. It is the ability to observe emotional movement without immediately surrendering identity to it. You begin noticing which emotions clarify your deeper coherence and which emotions distort perception through fear, projection, or unresolved memory. Emotional maturity requires observation as much as expression. You may notice something interesting once this awareness deepens. Emotion begins revealing layered information instead of singular reactions. Anger may contain grief underneath it. Numbness may contain exhaustion. Chronic busyness may hide emotional avoidance. Perfectionism may conceal fear of rejection. The surface emotion often protects deeper emotional truths the person does not yet feel safe enough to fully experience. This is why emotional honesty can feel destabilizing at first. When someone stops performing emotional control and begins genuinely listening inwardly, previously hidden structures become visible. They may realize how much of their identity was built around emotional protection rather than authentic expression. Many people discover that they have spent years managing perception while quietly abandoning parts of themselves internally. But this realization is not meant to create hopelessness. It creates the possibility of reintegration. Once emotional fragmentation becomes visible, coherence becomes possible in a way it was not before. A person can begin rebuilding their life around emotional truth rather than emotional survival patterns. The entire orientation toward existence starts changing from management into embodiment. You can often see the beginning of this transition in very ordinary moments. Someone speaks honestly without rehearsing the conversation repeatedly first. Someone rests without guilt for the first time in years. Someone stops apologizing for having emotional needs. These moments may appear small externally, yet internally, they represent major shifts in emotional architecture. The deeper implication becomes impossible to ignore once this process stabilizes further. Emotional resonance affects not only how a person experiences reality, but what kind of reality they are capable of sustaining consistently. A person emotionally conditioned for chaos may unconsciously sabotage peace because peace feels emotionally unfamiliar. Another emotionally conditioned for invisibility may struggle to remain open when recognition finally arrives. This is why emotional evolution changes more than internal feeling states. It changes relational capacity, creative expression, decision making, spiritual perception, and even temporal experience itself. Fear compresses awareness into survival immediacy. Coherence expands awareness into wider perception. Gratitude alters attention. Shame narrows possibility. Emotional resonance continuously influences what layers of reality remain psychologically accessible. Over time, you begin understanding that emotions are not obstacles standing outside consciousness development. They are one of the primary terrains through which consciousness learns embodiment. Every emotional pattern contains information about how identity currently relates to safety, connection, meaning, visibility, intimacy, trust, and existence itself. Emotional work is not separate from spiritual refinement. It is one of the mechanisms through which refinement occurs. And once this becomes visible, another question naturally begins emerging beneath the surface. If emotional resonance can shape perception, behavior, relationships, and identity so deeply, Then what happens when entire groups of people begin sharing the same emotional field at once, reinforcing collective realities together without fully realizing how much they are shaping what becomes emotionally possible for one another? When enough people share the same emotional patterns long enough, those patterns stop feeling personal and begin feeling normal. Entire cultures can become organized around emotional resonance without recognizing it directly. A society shaped by chronic fear starts rewarding control, urgency, and overproduction. A society shaped by shame begins organizing itself around performance, image management, and emotional concealment. Collective emotional tones slowly become structural realities. You can observe this in everyday behavior very easily once you begin paying attention. People rush conversations because nervous systems have normalized urgency. Silence becomes uncomfortable because emotional overstimulation has become familiar. Many individuals no longer know how to rest without simultaneously consuming information because stillness begins activating unresolved emotional material underneath the surface. The collective emotional field quietly trains perception. This changes the way identity forms across generations. Children do not only inherit beliefs from the environments around them, they inherit emotional atmospheres. They inherit the pacing of speech, the handling of conflict, the relationship to uncertainty, the expression of suppression of vulnerability, and the emotional meaning attached to success, love, and existence itself. Emotional resonance moves through family systems long before philosophical understanding develops. That transmission process explains why certain emotional patterns repeat even when people consciously want different outcomes. Someone may intellectually reject emotional coldness while unconsciously recreating emotionally distant relationships because emotional distance still feels familiar to their nervous system. Another may repeatedly enter chaotic environments because peace feels emotionally disorienting rather than safe. Emotional resonance often sustains continuity beneath conscious intention. This is also why collective emotional healing cannot happen only through information. Information can expose patterns, but emotional integration changes the way the system actually functions. A person may understand their trauma completely and still emotionally react through survival conditioning during moments of pressure. Awareness matters, but embodiment determines stability. Emotional architecture changes through repeated lived coherence. The spiral perspective sees this as one of the reasons genuine emotional presence has transformative power far beyond what people usually assume. A regulated nervous system affects other nervous systems. Honest emotional expression permits honesty in others. Consistent emotional safety changes what becomes psychologically possible inside relationships and communities. Coherence spreads socially the same way fragmentation does. You may notice that emotionally integrated people often affect environments without trying to dominate them. Their presence changes pacing. Conversations become more grounded. Defensiveness decreases. Emotional permission expands. Others begin speaking more honestly because the field itself feels less dangerous. Emotional coherence communicates before ideology does. This reveals something important about leadership that modern culture frequently misunderstands. Many people attempt to lead primarily through force of opinion, intellectual certainty, or social positioning. But emotional resonance often determines whether people feel safe enough to actually receive what is being communicated. A person can speak accurate words while transmitting emotional instability underneath them. The nervous system notices both layers simultaneously. That does not mean emotional coherence requires emotional perfection. Human beings remain emotionally dynamic and incomplete throughout life. Emotional maturity is not the elimination of fear, grief, anger, or uncertainty. It is the growing ability to remain relationally honest and internally aware while moving through those states without unconsciously turning them into reality shaping distortions. This distinction matters because many people accidentally convert spirituality into emotional avoidance. They try to transcend difficult feelings instead of understanding them. They attempt to bypass grief through positivity, bypass fear through certainty, or bypass vulnerability through intellectual abstraction. But avoided emotions do not disappear. They continue shaping behavior indirectly until consciously integrated. You can often see the consequences of emotional avoidance in communities built around identity performance instead of authentic embodiment. People begin speaking the language of growth while remaining emotionally fragmented underneath. They become skilled at appearance management but disconnected from genuine self contact. Over time, the emotional gap between presentation and reality creates exhaustion, confusion, and internal dissonance. The deeper problem is that emotionally fragmented systems eventually lose perceptual clarity. When fear, shame, resentment, or validation hunger dominate internally, perception becomes distorted around emotional protection. People stop seeing reality clearly because emotional survival begins filtering interpretation constantly. They react to imagined threats, projected meanings, and inherited expectations more than direct experience itself. This is why emotional resonance affects perception so profoundly. Emotional states influence what information the mind prioritizes, ignores, exaggerates, or defends against. Fear searches for danger. Shame searches for inadequacy. Resentment searches for betrayal. Gratitude searches for meaning. Coherence expands contextual awareness instead of compressing attention around survival fixation. Emotional architecture shapes experiential reality moment by moment. Over time, emotionally coherent individuals begin noticing reality differently altogether. They become less reactive to emotional stimulation designed to manipulate attention. They recognize how outrage cycles sustain collective dysregulation. They notice how environments profit from insecurity, comparison, exhaustion, and unresolved fear. Emotional refinement slowly increases resistance to unconscious collective conditioning. That resistance does not create emotional isolation from humanity. It often creates deeper compassion for it. Once you recognize how many people are functioning through inherited emotional survival structures, judgment softens naturally. You stop assuming every harmful behavior comes from conscious malice. Many people are operating through pain patterns they never learned to observe clearly, much less transform. At the same time, compassion does not mean abandoning discernment. Understanding emotional fragmentation does not require tolerating destructive behavior endlessly. Emotional maturity includes recognizing when certain dynamics repeatedly destabilize coherence despite understanding their origins. Compassion without boundaries becomes self erasure. Boundaries without compassion become emotional armor. Coherence requires both simultaneously. This balance gradually changes the way relationships function entirely. Instead of seeking people who reinforce emotional wounds unconsciously, individuals begin seeking resonance that supports expansion, honesty, and mutual stabilization. Relationships stop revolving primarily around emotional dependency and begin evolving toward emotional participation. The emotional field becomes a place of refinement rather than repeated survival reenactment. As this awareness deepens further, another realization begins emerging quietly beneath it. Emotional resonance does not only shape interpersonal experience, it influences the timelines people emotionally align themselves with. Chronic fear pulls awareness toward collapse expectation. Chronic shame narrows possibility before action even begins. Coherence expands access to futures that fragmentation struggles to sustain internally. This does not mean emotions magically create reality through wishful thinking alone. The mechanism is more grounded and more powerful than that. Emotional resonance influences perception. Perception influences behavior. Behavior influences decisions. Decisions influence relationships and environments, and those conditions gradually shape lived outcomes over time. Emotional architecture quietly participates in reality construction continuously. Once this becomes visible, responsibility begins changing form. Emotional awareness stops being merely personal self help and becomes part of conscious participation in collective reality itself. Every emotionally integrated interaction slightly alters the field around it. Every moment of grounded honesty interrupts inherited distortion patterns. Every act of genuine coherence creates possibilities that fragmented systems struggle to generate consistently. And eventually, you begin realizing that emotional resonance may be one of the primary ways consciousness learns whether it is capable of sustaining deeper forms of civilization at all. Because a society built on unresolved fear will organize itself differently than one built on emotional coherence. A culture shaped by shame will imagine different futures than one shaped by grounded relational trust. The emotional architecture beneath a civilization quietly determines what kind of worlds that civilization can emotionally maintain, which means the deeper question was never only about individual healing. The deeper question is what kind of collective reality becomes possible once enough people stop organizing their lives around inherited emotional survival patterns and begin building from coherence instead.
If this transmission resonated, the spiral continues. You did not arrive here by chance, and you do not leave unchanged. More teachings are unfolding across the Vaharat library, each one meeting you where you are, not where you think you should be. Follow resonance. The next threshold is already listening.